we're live.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with a quick synopsis. 7 months after the Columbia accident, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, CAIB, presented their report on the causes of the accident. The board pinpointed the technical causes of the accident. It also identified organizational issues within NASA dating back decades. The CAIB also reported how manager might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcoming at NASA that contributed to the catastrophe. So we need to identify issues and explain why they were important.
Okay. I think right off the bat, like as far as like issues were definitely in the reading it talked about bureaucratic systems, how companies with low trust tend to do exactly that. They don't trust their employees to do certain things, and it gives the example of buying things out of petty cash and things like that. But I think an example from the case was how they had wanted more images of the launch itself to be able to determine the damage done, but they had to go through their probably 3 or 4 tiers of approval before they could actually get those images, and it ended up getting lost in the shuffle because it didn't go through the proper channels, I guess. And so I think that was definitely a big issue, is not trusting them enough, especially on such a matter like that. I wouldn't honestly think twice about somebody asking for pictures to determine damage, especially.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, I
I think
know.
it's sad. Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Dallin.
Okay. I just think that, I don't know, it said that over the years their budgets just kept getting cut and cut, and I think that if they were working more effective, they could have gotten more missions out. Maybe the government could have trusted them with more funds so that they could have put better cameras on there. It just seemed like the program just wasn't really, I don't know, the government really didn't care to give them more money. Like, I don't know, they just kept cutting their budgets more and more. So they probably could have been more effective if they had a more effective organization.
I know my interesting take on this, and I can speak from direct experience because I worked for City of Henderson, so I know what it's like to be on the government side of positioning and to deal with a public perspective and what the public views. And so I get to see the other side of the lack of trust
Right.
that is experienced. And with that being said, everything I do for my job, I have to explain everything. I have to have a document of it. So I waste so much time in all this document keeping just to explain, here's what I did and here's why I did it. This explains why my job's important. And it's just exhausting. And we see that with every level of government. Unfortunately, we talk about the lack of distrust, and it was pointed out in Stephen Covey's book how government in general is one of the most distrusted organizations, unfortunately, due to a few bad things. But now that's the overall scope of government.
Right.
And with that being said, I was comparing that to NASA, and I think NASA's greatest weakness now is the fact that it's a government-run organization. Because same idea, everything they do, they have to justify. They have to explain why they need these funds. They explain what they're doing and why. They explain why they're not doing what they're not doing. And they waste so much time in that. And just like it talks about, when there's no trust, time goes way up, and the speed goes down, and then the cost goes up. And that's just it. So you talk about budget and needing more budget, when realistically it was like, can we have managed our budget better? They talk about in the case it takes $42 million to send a rocket up, which to me is insane.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take out of perspective, but because I know we need to reference this case as of 2000. Well, I don't know. We're analyzing this in past tense, so maybe we can be more relevant. I know in previous cases we need to assume the case at the time, But the reason I bring that up because I just want to share, like, I don't know if you're familiar. So that rocket that we were talking about earlier that they landed at sea, that's done by a company that's called SpaceX. And they claim they could have a shuttle in space for $22 million.
Wow.
So half the cost of NASA, and in their eyes, they think, how do you possibly total $42 million? How? And that was recent, when costs theoretically should have gone up over the last decade.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, again, I fear, because it's a government-run organization, there is so much wasted funds that's like, well, the money's there, but it's being misused. And I think that reveals itself later on in the case for sure, as you recognize, like, well, we don't have funding here, we don't have funding there, we use funds here, and it was just not balanced right. I don't know if NASA's in a position to necessarily change any of that themselves. Because again, when it's a government-run organization, they don't get audited like someone in the private sector would. So they have a different kind of accountant doing their books, crunching numbers, deciding where money's going. They can twist things the way they need. They can justify needing new positions for new hires. And so that was just my big thing. That was like my huge rant for my paper, just recognizing it's like, it's government run, they're wasting money, and they're not focusing on the important things because they waste so much time justifying what they're doing rather than doing their jobs and focusing on the job at hand.
Right. Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I can't remember what the exact word in the book they use for it, but basically, well, like when you become complacent in your job as well. Yeah. Do you guys remember? I can't remember exactly the word. I would look it up, but so that was one of the basically effects of having a low trust and having that tax on your business was that fact that they become complacent. And I think, that made me realize, that's a huge issue with government jobs and why, it should, like you say, to be put back towards the private sector, because I feel like they didn't assess the risks on a level they should have. Whereas, if you're thinking about potential investors, you're going to have those risks, analyzed to the max. Like they're going to want to know exactly, what the human toll could be, what the damage could be in monetary values as well. And so I think when you take it from the private sector, and like you're saying, heading towards more of a government agency, it just loses that innovation factor as well. They're not as motivated or incentivized to have those leaps and bounds in technology that, like you said, SpaceX reduced their costs by a lot. And I think that's a large part because they're a privately funded company, that's a huge motivator. And I think that's a good motivator. To be perfectly honest, I'm a huge believer in capitalism and how, it affects things for the better, and especially in situations like that. Like, yeah, the money might be at the heart of it, but, it does get things done, and it for sure would have reduced the human cost in the long run, I believe, too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know you mentioned an important fact that they're not worried about investors. They're getting their tax dollars. That's not changing. That source of income, that's not going anywhere. Worst case scenario, something like this, they get a slap on the hand. Don't let this happen again.
Right.
Public sector, you just lost your job possibly.
Yeah, possibly the company.
That fear, like you said, is what causes them to do their research to ensure we're not going to have any problems, right? Because we can't afford to have problems. If it means we take longer, we do more research, fine, but we cannot fail. And that fear is not, I don't see that with NASA.
Right.
They received public humiliation because the Columbia was witnessed. it's caught on camera. I think if that went down without anyone seeing, it would have been a little nub in the newspaper. Ship didn't make it, no big deal. But I think it was because it got caught on camera that exposed everything and made them finally do some research more in depth than I think they would have otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, going more in detail with the case, I guess, since we're done ranting about the government issue behind this. Obviously, the biggest thing I think we can all agree on is the recognition that the foam that was being used was not adequate for the job. And that's going to lead to the failure of the wing and not being able to support and sustain the high temperatures, and eventually when they're coming in to reentry. So I mean, that was just an issue, and we read earlier on that was recognized again decades ago. They had the poor philosophy that if it didn't fail, then it's okay to keep using.
Right.
It doesn't say it's safe, it just says it didn't fail. I mean, it makes you think of Ford right now. They're recalling a bunch of cars because of having certain airbags. And it's like, they're not all going to fail, but they're not taking that chance.
Right.
And that's the situation here. Is like, but there's a problem, fix it. It's not the safest, so fix it. And so that was one area where we saw him chop the corners.
Yeah, and I think that just, proves a reactive kind of nature to, especially to the foam issue. They would rather react to it than be proactive about it and, potentially avoid it, because like the case mentioned too, it was something getting swept under the rug for years, and like many missions where it was a problem and the same kind of problem was happening, but I don't know if nobody took the initiative, or because of the system, how it was set up, if somebody took it to a higher up and they didn't pass it along the chain in that regard too.
Right. You touched on the chain issue a couple times, and I'll expand on it as well.
Sure.
I feel like, again, I want to say because of the government influence of how those jobs are run, I think they've tried to justify so many positions. Now, not to take away, because I understand there are some minor positions that play a huge role. I have an aunt, or I gotta think about this. On my wife's side, I don't want to, but anyway, her sole job, she worked for NASA, and her job was strictly the hinges on the space shuttle.
Oh, wow.
That was it. Nothing else but just the hinges. It's like, again, it is an important role, and I find it interesting that you could justify an entire person's pay on that one piece.
Right.
Could that person have done more? I imagine she probably has that knowledge, capability to understand and do more. And so I think, going back to, like, it's too big. And so, so my point being, it's too big. NASA's too big. They have too many employees. They're stretched really thin. And I feel like they grew too fast. And because of that, the management, the organization, the structure is not established for that. And hence, all of a sudden, there's all these groups, and they're all doing their thing. There's no sense of unity, and hence we see the lack of communication getting passed on. Certain groups aren't appreciating other groups. And so that was a problem that I felt presented itself in why communication was not being executed correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely liked your idea about the unity. I totally agree with, having departments that are dedicated to certain things. But like I said as well, you do need that unity, whereas, people are aware of what others are doing around them, so that, you still have the innovation that you need, or you still have an outside, I guess, a fresh eye on each matter as well. because you become so focused in your job, again with the foam, like, the people that dealt with the foam, maybe they were just so focused on that foam, and then it almost became ingrained in them that was always going to be an in-family problem, like in their words, so that newcomers could have even been brought up to know that as well. Just think, oh, this is not a problem we need to fix. So I definitely agree. Just like just having more unity, or at least being aware with everything that's going on. So maybe briefing the whole organization on maybe advancements in the research or things that haven't been looked at or revised, I think would be a good alternative to how it was done previously.
Yeah. How about you, Dallin? Was there any key things that stood out to you?
I think that it was kind of sad that even after having, was it the Challenger in the 80s, where like they didn't fully look into something and the catastrophe happened. I just thought it was sad that even if it's something that could have been minor, like you might as well look into it. Like even if you don't, I don't know. I think the employees may have felt like they knew everything, or that they just really just were too comfortable where they were at. It's just sad that even if it's something where in their mind they're like, okay, well, this isn't a real problem, they should still just, just take that little bit of time and just check it out just in case, because, like, I don't know. I'm taking a business law class as well, and I've learned that, like, you have to be careful about every single thing you're doing because it could be used against you, like, when things go wrong. So,
Right.
like, just don't take that risk, like bad press, bad court trials, like, I don't know, because even if they did just look into it, try to fix it, then we wouldn't even be studying this case report. Like it'd be like, okay, they did their best, but it would, I don't know, I just thought it was kind of sad.
It's interesting too. Something that clarified, like, stood out to me. I was like, the question I threw out as kind of a rhetorical question to them is like, well, what's your focus? These people are acting like scientists, as though they have no morals.
Mm.
And I say that in regards to they're focused on the mission, get the mission done. And it's like, as soon as something's in jeopardy, why does that not take precedence? In the case of you have a damaged ship, and they're not going to take a moment to spin it around to look at it, because that's going to cost time and money, because that's the issue. Time and money are the issues, and now people have lost their lives because of that. What's the cost of someone's life? And so that was my main thing, is like, at what point do you decide, like, we don't care, we'll just, it's whatever. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, I think that I wrote a little bit about that, just on the politics side of things, like, because like you mentioned, they were so focused on meeting that deadline because they saw it as potentially losing funding from the government if they didn't have their turnaround time in a certain within a certain window and things like that. And so I just really feel like the whole politics side of it really tainted that. People. I also mentioned about how the leaders of the organization have to show what their values are, what they expect from the company. And I think something to remedy that would have been, there's small examples in the book, like one of the leaders, said, if we're not having fun, we're not going to do business. And so, he asked one of his guys, are you having fun on this deal? And he said no. And so they're like, okay, we're done. But I think a good example that NASA, could have, or a good idea that they could have implemented is, okay, these astronauts' safety is our number one priority. And so that's going to take precedence over everything. And so, had they demonstrated that with their actions, even in the face of losing potential funding or not meeting their targets for time, then I think that just changes the whole atmosphere of things. That would really break that fog of the workers at that point and have them realize, what? Yeah, their safety is the number one issue. What can I be looking for that has to do with their safety?
I'm curious. I didn't check. Is there anything that says how much it would have projected to have cost to have turned the ship around to look at it?
I think it does say as part of it. I'll see if I can pull it up here.
Because the reason I bring that up, and going back to what Dallin pointed out with the Challenger when it went down, what is the cost of the equipment, that in and of itself, compared to what the minor cost would have been to have done repairs?
Oh, right, yeah, that's a good point.
I look at that.
The whole ship.
What was that, Dallin?
Yeah, you're right. Like, they lost the whole ship as well. Like, they lost lives on the whole ship with the Challenger, and with this one.
Yeah.
In an attempt to save money, they lost everything.
So your cost of I'm guessing, we'll say, $1 million. It was going to cost $1 million more to have the ship turn around and look at it. Could have fixed it, ensured that it landed safely. Okay, so we'll consider that's your insurance. You didn't pay for your insurance, and now you just lost your $20 million space shuttle. And that's where it's like, what's your priority here? Because now that the cost of that mission just skyrocketed now after losing your equipment, that in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know with Science X, that was their whole goal with this last project, is they recognize how much it costs for them every time they do a rocket launch, and they realize, money in and of itself is just falling to the ground and dying. And that's where they said, hey, if we can find a way to capture that and reuse it, that's going to cut our costs down even more significantly.
Right.
And so, I don't know if you understood what they've done. I'll pull it up. I got the YouTube video for it.
Sure.
And so what it is, it's the fuel part of the rocket. So as the rocket's going up, and all of a sudden you'll see the fuel part detaches and falls back to Earth.
Oh, right.
That part is what they programmed to land safely again, so they can reuse that. And that's several $1 million that now they won't have to pay for it on their next launch because they have the equipment ready to go already.
Right. That's awesome, yeah, because in the reading it did talk about 90% of the weight of those shuttles, or rockets, I guess, combined, was the fuel itself. So yeah. That's really cool.
One question it has here is, what was the recovery window in this case? Meaning the time between the problem of the foam strike was discovered after launch on the day of the Columbia's Wait, what is that?
So
I think I misread the question earlier, but anyway, it was talking about the recovery time, and I thought it was referring to when the problem was first recognized, just the fact that there was a problem with parts on the space shuttle, and thinking that was decades in advance red flags that should have been addressed. So that's how I was thinking of the recovery window. You had that much time.
Right.
But I think in this case, they're actually being more specific as to the incident in space, which the foam issue happened on takeoff,
Right,
going
day
out,
one, yeah.
day one, exactly. And so then it was there the whole 16 days before being addressed prior to coming back into reentry.
Right. Yeah, so they had, yeah, like you said, they had those 15 days, to potentially do something about it. And I think they
Right.
even talked about how, didn't they, yeah, they shot down the idea of, I can't remember what they call it, but basically an astronaut going outside to assess it, which would have slowed them down. I think that's what you touched on earlier. Um, but yeah, so that, I mean, that was an option they could have done in that time. I'm assuming you could get that done in one day, so potentially have that done on the second day.
Right. Trying to review the problem or the questions because it just says ask the questions that you feel are pertinent. We've touched on several of them, like when did the problems with the Columbia begin? Why did the debris strikes become an acceptable risk? Which, if I remember correctly, they just justified it because that's likely to happen in space regardless, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what they said.
So they just figured it's going to happen and it's whatever, rather than trying to prepare against it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they also mentioned they were solely interested in the outside panels on the shuttle itself rather than what eventually got damaged. I can't remember the acronym for it, but basically the
Yeah.
panels that were underneath the immediate outside ones. So that was another focus they kind of lost, was not worrying about those under panels. Yeah, and that was something that like just kind of irked me more than anything, was just that they were so willing to rely on this simulator, which they admitted was used to calculating things, or used to calculating damage for much smaller foam strikes than the piece that actually came off. Like, again, they were so willing to devote their time into seeing what that simulator said rather than just sending an astronaut out, and having him assess the damage. It's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It could be eyes on rather than some, yeah, a simulation that is only going to be accurate under like strict circumstances.
Right. Well, and you also touched on those new tiles they were using, and it mentions how they didn't even do proper testing on those tiles. They did the on ground testing,
Oh, right, yeah.
and it's like, how do you possibly compare that to the real pressures it's going to face in air? Like, I don't even understand how you could make that assumption that the forces you apply on ground are even comparable.
Right. Yeah, and again, I think that all ties in with the whole politics issue, is that, I think it said the reason they did that on ground testing rather than in flight was because they were so strict on their time constraint. They were trying to
Time
meet
and money.
deadline after deadline, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see. I can't tell if there's anything else we need to like fully address. There's a lot here about like human cognitive biases.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So I think I mentioned about that, like just um, you know, basically a tendency we have is just we'll have a certain take on something, and we're just looking for evidence to support that, rather than looking at the full picture and at evidence that could potentially sway us from that viewpoint. I think that's definitely um, that played a part.
well, you nailed that one. Good job.
So like as in like how they were they were looking for evidence to just say it was not an in-flight risk, and they were taking the examples of the previous flights, and so that kind of just helped them say, hey, we have evidence that this hasn't occurred, and they weren't necessarily looking to um, disprove that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say as well. And it talked about that, how their idea wasn't prove a theory right, it's prove a theory wrong. So their theory was that it's not a risk, and so they're like, okay, we'll prove that wrong.
It's interesting you kind of bring that up. You see that more now, clearly, how people focus on testing it, trying to prove it wrong in order to verify that it works. If it can withstand the test, then it's more sustainable, more accurate. I know a fun instance to relate to this story. Are you aware of the attachment that they've just recently added to the space shuttle?
No.
So just this last month, I believe it was, they sent a rocket up and it had an attachment on it. And the fun
Oh,
thing that's neat is that the guy who built it and where it was built was right here out of North Las Vegas, where I'm at.
oh, cool.
And my last bishop was the mayor of North Las Vegas, so he shared with me all the details about it. This guy built a inflatable room that will be attached to the space shuttle to add another room to the space shuttle.
Oh,
And so this guy, he would sit in this warehouse with a 30-06, and he would shoot this room all day to simulate small little meteorites hitting this room. Like, can it withstand these rocks and debris and everything hitting it, and making sure it's durable enough. And I just thought that was pretty neat.
wow, yeah. What a way to
Anyway,
do it, though. Hey, 30-06.
yeah. So yeah, they just did that just this last month, and I think it was on the news just last week. It showed it being attached and then inflating it. So it's kind of neat. It's about the size of like a really large master bedroom. But then they've talked about how if that's successful, then they're going to use that kind of technology and considering setting up a base on Mars or something in order to conduct more research there. Okay, do you remember how I changed my screen so that you guys can view my screen?
Yeah, on the left side, it's the green square called like the second icon down.
Oh,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay, so I got a video here that I'm supposed to show. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Is there any sound?
Well, I feel like that's a bit disturbing to watch.
Yeah, seriously. I
Yeah.
was gonna say that just puts it back into perspective for me just how you like you had mentioned before, can you really put a dollar amount on somebody's life? Like what's is it or is it not worth spending that extra time or extra money to ensure their safety? I think there's really no question. That's sad.
I don't know, man. I gotta admit, I'm like shocked right now to have watched that video
Yeah,
because it certainly puts it in new light. The fact that it caught the, I expected it to be like the just the footage of it coming down. I didn't expect the conversation to be revealed because I feel like that's just like what an unfortunate last words to have in your head.
yeah.
You guys feel like there's anything else we need to add?
Hmm. I
Did
don't
you
know.
say no, Dylan?
I said I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think so, honestly.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast then.